Okay, hello and welcome back everyone to Grockit's OGTV GMAT edition. We're going through the 12th edition to the Guide to the Test, and we're actually getting close to the end of the 12th edition of the Guide to the Test, one with the purple cover that you should have in front of you. My name's Jim Jacobson, like it says up there. I guess sometimes I just like to highlight my name and my picture, but that's me right there. I guess you'll just have to take my word for it since you probably won't ever see me in person. Anyway, that book that I mentioned that you should have in front of you, you should have open to page 660. Oops, that was the wrong button. Page 660 is where we are. We just finished we just finished the beginning, the very first broadcast on the sentence correction section. We are going to continue on with that section, and then that's the end of the series, basically, doing that section of things. So we are starting with question 12 right at the top of page 660, and we'll get through, I think we've scheduled up through 21 today. As usual, I will read the questions, talk about what from the initial passage we would want to think about in terms of what types of errors may be introduced by the or what types of issues are being tested that we can tell, what kind of predictions we can make about the answer choices, and then we go through the answer choices and process of elimination. And because certain types of errors are repeated throughout, or certain types of corrections are repeated through multiple answer choices, I would say sentence correction, more so than any other question type on the GMAT, is susceptible to one thing that you figure out can allow you to eliminate multiple answer choices. So even if you don't do it for other sections of the test, I highly recommend writing out grids, A, B, C, D, E, so that you can cross off things that repeat errors that you've figured out from whatever. Even if it's not something that's in the original answer choice that's wrong, if 2 out of 3 answer choice or two more answer choices do something that's not grammatically correct and you can eliminate it, you don't even have to look at the rest of that answer. Just know that it's wrong, and then save yourself some time and concentrate on the 2 that are left. So very important skill. It really can save you time unless you're one of those brilliant people who can keep it all in your head. If you are, more power to you. But if you're one of those people, maybe you're not the sort of person who wants help on broadcast via an internet broadcast. So anyway, let us move on to number 12. So rising inventories, when unaccompanied correspondingly by increases in sales, can lead to production cutbacks that would hamper economic growth. So once again, in terms of issues we notice right away, we have rising inventories, which is clearly the subject. And then we have a modifying phrase. And then we have the verb. Classic GMAT instance of either having a subject-verb mismatch, so rising inventories is a plural subject, so perhaps having a singular verb. Also perhaps using the wrong pronoun for rising inventories. Again, as a plural noun, we would expect a plural pronoun to take its place if it appears later in the sentence. And then the other thing that jumped out at me in reading this is the when accompanied correspondingly. We talked last time about the importance of the placement of adverbs and what they modify. Last time we really talked about the placement of the adverb itself with the word only, and it does matter where the word only goes because it's a restrictive adverb. In this particular case, though, sometimes we have the question of adverb versus adjective, because adjectives can modify nouns, and that's it. Adverbs can modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. So you could say something is very red. That's a adverb. Very is the adverb modifying the adjective red. So very, or and very actually works for all of these. Well, actually, very doesn't work for he very jumped the fence. No, he happily How did he do it? He did it happily. Adverbs, adverbs can modify other adverbs very slowly. So very works for both adjectives and adverbs. Anyway, those are just some examples. Anyway, when accompanied correspondingly, I'm not exactly sure how you accompany something in a corresponding manner. Because if something is going together, if it's accompanied already, there's already an element of that built in there. So it's probably going to be make more sense for corresponding to modify some other noun, and so it needs to be corresponding, not correspondingly. Corresponding. I need to try talking less when I'm writing because it leads to more mistakes. Anyway, let's see what we get in the answer choices. We know choice A has this accompanied correspondingly, and that's kind of strange. Just the vertical scan of that particular issue, choice B has corresponding increases. Choice C has corresponding sales increases. D has correspondingly increased sales. So D is, I don't know. I mean, we can recheck D when we get to it. But so choices A and D are the only ones that leave correspondingly. Not that it's automatically wrong, but in this context is likely to be. We'll check D when we get there, though. A definitely has problems, though. Choice B, when not accompanied by corresponding increases in sales, possibly leads. So there's one of our problems right there. Leads. Rising inventories is a plural subject. Leads is a singular verb, so that allows us to eliminate choice B. And actually choice D, when we look down there, it says possibly leads. D also has the singular verb, so that we're sure now that D is wrong. And right, so now we only have C and E that we need to look at. So rising inventories, when they were unaccompanied by corresponding sales increases, can lead. So here we have an interesting problem with while they were unaccompanied, past tense, and then we have this main verb, can lead. And that shift in tense doesn't really make any sense. When they were that, they can do this now. You could say when they were this, they could do this in the past, could being the past tense of can. When you could say when they are unaccompanied, they can do this now. But having the past tense circumstance and the present tense functionality, I was supposed to just shift directly to the E. Tense is the issue with C, so that's naughty. Choice E, if not accompanied by corresponding increases in sales, can lead. So if not accompanied, present tense, if they are not accompanied, and can lead, so we have the verb tense. It's the right number for the verb. This question also makes an issue of the this contrast between not accompanied versus unaccompanied. And I would characterize that as not something, well, let's see, how do I put this? The GMAT wants you to have not accompanied rather than unaccompanied because it feels that not emphasizes the negative more. I'm not really in a good position to contradict the official guide because, of course, they're the ones who make the test. I would argue that in most circumstances, if there is a negative form with one verb or with one word, that you're still safer with that on the GMAT because it's fewer words. In this particular case, every other answer choice introduces other errors. So, we had plenty of reason to eliminate all the unaccompanieds versus not accompanieds. But just be aware that they have this idea that sometimes if you really want to emphasize that something is not something, that they want not as a separate word. In real life, though, unaccompanied would be the better word, unless you were going to capitalize the word not to really emphasize it. Anyway, still page 660, number 13. A surge in new home sales and a drop in weekly unemployment claims suggest that the economy might not be as weak as some analysts previously thought. Okay, so in terms of what we might look for in this one, we have a surge in new home sales and a drop in weekly unemployment. So we have X and Y. We have a compound subject. Remember, and is the only word that can take two singular elements of your subject and make it into a plural subject. So X and Y equals a plural subject. So in this particular case, we definitely want an answer that has a plural verb. So X and Y, they suggest. That's the plural form. Anything that has suggests with an S is naughty. You know, that's the singular form. We don't want that one. Let's see which of the answer choices have that. Oh, and sorry, back to the other predictions before we get to the answer choices. The other prediction for this one is, the economy might not be as weak as some analysts thought. So, as X, as, Y, it's not as X as Y, not as weak as thought. And X and Y can be just adjectives. They can actually be phrases or clauses even. But that's the idiom. And so things that make this more wordy or somehow not a parallel construction would be other things that we would look for in terms of errors. So the choice A, as written, does have suggest, which is the form we needed, and might not be as weak as some analysts previously thought. Sounds okay. There may be something more concise in the answer choices. So unlike other question types, unless you are really short for time, even if the answer looks correct as written, you should read the answer choices anyway, even more so than the other ones, because it is possible that A is correct, but the only thing wrong with it is that it's wordy, and that there's some other way of expressing the exact same idea much more concisely, and then that other answer would be the right one. So even though I feel pretty good about the way choice A is written, there could be something better and shorter, and so we need to keep reading. Choice B, claims suggests. So remember, suggests was the thing that we were looking for as one of our predicted wrong answers with a subject-verb mismatch. And also note that they changed around the, as X, as Y. They have the economy might not be so weak as some analysts have previously thought. So a couple things changed with B, but suggests alone is enough to mark it wrong. Choice C, claims suggest that the economy might not be as weak as have been previously thought by some economists. Economy is a singular subject, and have been thought is a plural verb. So here, even though it's not the subject-verb mismatch that we were expecting between surge in new home sales and drop in weekly unemployment claims, and then suggest, they introduced yet another subject-verb mismatch. So economy has been thought. Economies have been thought. So another verb-number mismatch. Choice D, claims suggesting about the economy that it might not be so weak as previously thought by some analysts. Well, so reading that into the complete sentence, it says, a surge in new home sales and a drop in weekly unemployment claims suggesting about the economy that it might not be so weak as previously thought by some analysts. Hopefully my intonation there made it clear that what we're missing there is a main verb. There's no finite verb, and by finite verb I mean a verb like, jumped or runs. Okay? Non-finite verb forms are things like to smile. In fact, that's called the infinitive. It doesn't have an ending on it to show person or number or anything like that. Also, participle forms like suggesting and, suggesting is the one used in choice D. Those are not finite verb forms. It's not a main verb. And so without a main verb, you don't have a sentence, and you can't do sentence correction if you don't have a sentence. So no verb means no right answer. And actually, it looks like choice E does the same thing. Claims, suggesting the economy might not be as weak as previously thought to be by some analysts. And then there's also a parallelism issue, but also there's no verb in that one too, so doubly wrong, leaving us with choice A. Okay, 660, number 14. Sunspots, vortices of gas associated with strong electromagnetic activity, are visible as dark spots on the surface of the sun, but have never been sighted on the sun's poles or equator. Okay, so once again we have the subject, sunspots. We have, and when you kind of rename or explain what the word you just said is, by giving like a definition or additional information like, Henry, Jennifer's daughter, or son. I'm having gender problems today apparently. Anyway, so when you rename a noun that you just named, that's called apposition. And it's usually set off by commas. So we have noun, some appositive phrase that kind of redescribes what it is. So we say sunspots, and then we say what sunspots are. They're vortices of gas associated with strong electromagnetic activity. If you didn't know that they just told you what sunspots are. And then we have the verb. So whenever we separate the subject from the verb, one thing we should be anticipating is a subject-verb mismatch where they change the tense on us or change the number. Subject is singular, verb is plural, or in this case, sunspots is plural, so the subject should be plural and might end up being singular. And then we also have some other modifying phrases that are in the underlying portion. So the main verb is sunspots are visible, but have never been sighted. Okay? So sunspots the main sentences are visible. The word but is a coordinating conjunction which joins two things that are similar grammatically. Are visible, sunspots are visible is a independent clause, and so we would expect to join either another independent clause or another verb phrase. So sunspots are visible, but, and in this case we don't have a new subject. So like roses are red, but violets are blue. There we would join two independent clauses. Joining just two verb phrases would be roses are red, but they have thorns which hurt. So, or but have thorns that hurt. Sorry, I gave a subject in there. Roses are red, but have thorns that hurt. So there we're joining two verb phrases. So sunspots are visible, but have never been sighted. And so this so far is okay for choice A. But whatever appears in there, then we have these other modifying phrases like are visible as dark spots on the surface of the sun, but have never been sighted on the sun's poles or equator. So we have, on the surface, floating around there, and then we have on the poles. And those modifying phrases need to appear, and this is true on the GMAT and actually in English in general, modifying phrases need to be as close as possible to the thing they're modifying to be clear. If you start moving them around, it gets confusing what things are actually on the surface of the sun or on the poles and equator of the sun. Okay, so that's a lot of analysis for this one. And just because we hadn't covered these topics before, I think, even in the previous broadcast, so I figure it's worth our time, since I'm using your time too. Okay, so choice A, as written, actually sounds grammatically correct, but let's keep looking for things that are shorter and more concise without introducing new errors. So choice B, sunspots are visible as dark spots that have never been sighted on the surface of the sun. Well, how can they be visible if they've never been sighted on the surface of the sun? So this is what I was talking about. We have this modifying phrase on the surface of the sun, which is supposed to modify sunspots. But if we put it after the verb have never been sighted, it sounds like they've actually, we have things that are visible, but nobody's ever seen them. Well, how do we know that they're visible? We don't. So choice B is not the right answer. C, so that's enough to eliminate choice B. C, sunspots appear on the surface of the sun as dark spots, although never sighted at the sun's poles or equator. So normally the word although is what's called a subordinating conjunction a lot of times. And what it's usually doing is starting a whole other clause. And when I use words like clause, I guess I'll have to give you grammar lessons as we go if you're not familiar with these things. Clauses are things that have subjects and verbs but might not be sentences, complete sentences on their own. You know, but he liked her anyway, because it starts with a conjunction like but is a clause, but it's not a complete sentence. It's not an independent clause. Although is one of those words that, although he really liked candy, you see, when you say that, you're expecting some other part of the sentence that's the contrast to go with what although was contrasting. So the word although normally is used that way. You can sometimes use it as, he was, rich, although, what would be a good contrast with rich? Rich, although careless. So you can say that, but normally although is used as a subordinating conjunction. So here, where are we? I already lost track. We are on C. Claims suggest that the economy might not... No, that's the wrong sentence. The sunspots appear on the surface of the sentence as dark spots, although never sighted at the sun's poles or equator. Although in that case is used kind of weirdly because never sighted is not a main verb, and although normally will have a main verb with it. So choice C's got that strange use of although. Choice D actually does the same thing. Sunspots appear as dark spots on the surface of the sun, although never having been sighted. If you have a choice, so this is an example of where you need to be suspicious of the words being and having. And this is the classic example of where having is definitely wrong. We'll actually have an example of where it's right later today in the broadcast. But having, in this case, is just extra words for the same idea. Even though choice C is wrong, it says the exact same thing that D does with fewer words. Although never cited and although never having been cited are the same thing. They both indicate that no citing has taken place in the past, but never having been cited does it with 4 words, where although never cited does it with 2. So that's why the GMAT doesn't like the word having. Again, it's not always wrong. We'll have it right later today. But and in real English, of course, you're allowed to do exactly what it says or what it did in choice D. It's just on the GMAT. It's extra words. And really, there's not too many good reasons for doing it. Anyway, choice D does the same thing with although. An unnecessary subordinating conjunction. And then E, sunspots appear as dark spots on the sun's surface which have never been sighted on. And so here, it's our buddy comma which. There are cases in English where comma which, whatever's before the comma, usually which just refers to what went right before the comma. For lunch yesterday, I got a sandwich, which was extremely filling. So that sandwich was extremely filling, and which referred right back to sandwich, the word that came right before it. So which normally refers to the word right before it. In this case, which in choice E is referring back to the sun's surface, which doesn't make sense because it's actually supposed to be referring to sunspots. Grammatically, there are instances where it can go back further, or where it can refer back to the entire clause before. Those are less common, and you should assume that which, by default, when it has the comma before it, is going with the noun right before it. The GMAT prefers another way of modifying everything that came before, and we'll get to that later. Anyway, choice E has problems. Choice A does not, making it the correct answer. And 660, number 15. Warning that computers in the United States are not secure, the National Academy of Sciences has urged the nation to revamp computer security procedures, institute new emergency response teams, creating a special non-government organization to take charge of computer security planning. This one, if you have any experience with doing GMAT sentence correction, should jump out at you as a list. And remember, the GMAT loves parallelism so much that the two of them should get married, and lists need to list parallel items. So we have basically three things that the National Academy of Sciences has urged the nation to do. They have urged the nation to revamp computer security procedures, institute new emergency response teams, and both of those things are in the non-underlined section of the sentence correction passage. So those are non-negotiable elements, and lists need to be parallel. So the third thing should be something like, revamp, institute, and then the other one should be a finite form of the verb. Instead, the sentence as written has creating a special non-government organization. So the three things we have revamp, we have institute, we probably should have create. And actually just doing a vertical scan of the answer choices, that allows us to get rid of A, B, and C. So we've already gotten our odds down to 50% just on the basis of this one single thing. Unfortunately, the GMAT doesn't give you lists all the time, because this would get really easy if it did. But whenever you see a list, be very suspicious and make sure that all elements of the list are parallel. I do want to add that there are ways that creating could have been correct if they intended the word creating, or what comes after the word, where it says institute new emergency response teams. If that had been the end of the list, and then we wanted to summarize all the things on the list and say what they were, that was, in effect, creating a special non-governmental organization, that would have been correct. But then the final item in the list would have needed to have the word "and" in front of it. So it would have needed to have said, do X, Y, revamp computer security procedures, and institute new emergency response teams. The word "and" before the final item in the list tells you where the list ends. And I just have to go and give an exception to that. You will have cases where you have compound lists, like, my choices for lunch were peanut butter and jelly, bacon, lettuce, and tomato, and a cheese sandwich. So in those cases, you can have "and" in compound elements in a list. Even with that, you still should have "and" before the final item in a list. Anyway, we have to differentiate between choices D and E. So do this, we have to revamp, we have to institute, and then choice D says, and create a special non-government organization for taking. And then choice E says, and create a special non-government organization to take. So really this comes down to idiom, whether you would say non-government organization for taking charge of computer security planning, or non-government organization to take charge of computer security planning. And on the GMAT, there are instances where you can use for plus an ing word to describe purpose. Very often those instances involve including the word purpose for purposes of doing, X. In general, the GMAT is going to prefer, when you want to express purpose, use the infinitive. And after I finish writing the word infinitive, that's the word like to run or to type, has the word to in front of it every time. So, and that's what's used to express purpose on the GMAT. So choice D has for taking, which is naughty. Choice E has the infinitive and is correct. Okay, page 660, question number 16. So retail sales rose 0.8% in August, intensifying expectations that personal spending in the July to September quarter more than doubled that of the 1.4% growth rate in personal spending for the previous quarter. Okay. Well, in terms of predictions, it looks, actually just looking at doing a quick vertical scan, we can see that we have a difference between, so we have the word expectations ending the part that's not underlined, and so It's not negotiable. That's what's in our sentence for sure. So we have expectations that, and then we have expectations of. What else do we need to worry about? So retail sales rose, intensifying expectations that the spending doubled that of the growth rate. So we also have a comparison where we are saying, expectations that X doubled Y. And when you have a comparison, you need to compare like things. You can't compare a snake with the length of a fish. You either need to compare a snake to a fish or the length of a snake to the length of a fish. So we need to make sure we're comparing like things. This is just another prediction. And I guess that's it for the predictions that I have based on just reading, the passage as written. There may be other things that appear in the answer choices once we get there. Okay, so choice A, expectations that personal spending in the July to September quarter more than doubled that of. So the personal spending doubled that of the growth rate. So I think there's an issue there because in A we are comparing that the actual spending is being compared to the growth rate. We either need to compare the spending or the two rates. And choice A is not doing that for us. Choice B, that personal spending in the July to September quarter would more than double the growth rate. Actually, I think, yeah, and so there's no that of the rate, so that the personal spending in that quarter would double the rate. So choice B actually does seem to be comparing the rates to rates. Which is appropriate, but we still have the expectations that versus expectations of, so let's keep B in reserve. So choice C has expectations of personal spending in the July to September quarter, that it more than double. Well, right there, basically with this one, remember what I talked about apposition, where you name a word and then you restate what that word is, and then you can say something else about it. Choice C is doing that. Expectations of personal spending, which is the way choice C starts. And then we're saying that it more than doubled. You don't normally have to start, after you've renamed something, you don't actually have to start your next phrase with that it. In fact, that's kind of weird and unidiomatic. So, and definitely, because the GMAT hates its extra words, that it in there is trouble. The only time we would want to see that repeated, if we had expectations that and then another that, would be if there were two different expectations that were parallel. That's the main place that you're going to see that repeated in sentence correction sentences. So choice C, definitely wordy and potentially awkward. Choice D, of personal spending in the July to September quarter, more than doubling that of. So there's another repeated that, and potentially an incorrect comparison. And you can have expectations of something and expectations that something happens. You just need to make sure that everything else is grammatically correct. Also, I would characterize it as more common that if you are saying, if the expectation is of an action, that if you're going to include that action, you're going to use the word that rather than of. So the expectation that he would visit this weekend is going to be fewer words than saying expectation of a visit from him this weekend. So that's why when you're talking about an action, that is generally going to show up more commonly than of on the GMAT. Where was I? Choice E. Expectations of personal spending in the July to September quarter. That it would more than double that of. Wow, that's got more words than C and D combined. So wordy, exclamation point, frowny face. So Choices C, D, and E all introduce extra words and potentially endanger the comparison for sure. Choice B, where you were comparing the rates to the rates, does not introduce extra words, and yeah, and then the one other thing that the official guide wanted to point out is the actual verb tense. So choice B has that it would more than double. Remember that would is both a conditional verb that at the time they predicted that they were expecting that these rates would rise, and that expectation was not yet known, so that makes it kind of conditional and less real, and therefore a conditional word like would makes sense. Also remember that would is the past tense of will, and so if you're describing an expectation of the future that happened in the past, you're going to use the word would anyway. So in the present tense, he says he will go to the store today. Last week, he said he would go to the store that day. So when you set a future verb in a past tense, you have to use the word would anyway. So whether this is some kind of hypothetical condition or setting a future prediction in the past, in both cases the word would in B is the most appropriate verb tense. So we already loved choice B. Well, I don't know if we loved it, but we already liked choice B because it had fewer words and didn't introduce any new problems. It also has the most correct verb tense. Okay, 660, last one on page 660, number 17. The Commission has directed advertisers to restrict the use of the word natural to foods that do not contain color or flavor additives, chemical preservatives, or nothing that has been synthesized. So the first thing that should scream out at you is that this is a list of things, and lists of things need to be parallel. I don't know if it deserves the frowny face. Sometimes lists can make it easier for you because they're relatively easy to spot. So we have a list of things that are not supposed to be in natural foods. So those things are color and flavor additives, chemical preservatives, and synthesized stuff. So one of the issues, the underlined portion is just this small bit, or nothing that has been synthesized. Immediately the thing that jumps out at me anyway is that we already have the phrase foods that do not contain. So if we're defining foods as natural that do not contain certain things, it doesn't make sense to use the word nothing then. They do not contain nothing that has been synthesized. That's what's called a double negative. People sometimes claim that double negatives always make your sentence say the opposite of what it said. That's not actually true. You can construct double negative sentences that are simply more emphatic. In this particular case, though, if things do not contain nothing, they contain something. So it does not make sense to have your definition of natural foods require them to contain something that's synthesized. So that's, we're using a little bit of our own outside knowledge of what constitutes natural foods here, but it really doesn't make sense to say that we don't want them to have nothing synthesized. We want them to have something synthesized. So anything that has the word nothing in it is going to be naughty. We can get rid of choices A and C. The other thing we can see now looking at the answer choices is that 3 of the answer choices have or and 2 of them have and. So what difference does that make when the final word in a list is or and? In the most strict sense, when you have and in the list, you are saying x plus y plus z. Even though the and only appears before the final thing, the implication then is that it is all of those things together. So a food cannot be, or a food can only be listed as natural if it does not have color or flavor additives, chemical preservatives, and then here's where the difference in and versus or. If we say and, if it doesn't have color, flavor additives, chemical preservatives, and synthesized things, then we can't call it natural. But if it only had 2 of the 3, if we have the word and there, It's only if all three conditions are met that we wouldn't be able to call the food natural. Whereas if we put or in there, it means that any one of the individual choices would make the food unable to be called natural. So we definitely want things with or in them. The two choices that have and are C and E. So now we've eliminated A, C, and E. All we have left is B and D. So do not contain color or flavor additives, chemical preservatives, or that has been synthesized. What is that doing in the sentence? So when we read that, well, let me read the whole thing and maybe it'll become clearer to you. The Commission has directed advertisers to restrict the use of the word natural to foods that do not contain color or flavor additives, chemical preservatives, or that has been synthesized. Well, actually, already in theory that would be then saying that the foods themselves have been synthesized, but already since the subject would have been foods, it should have been that have been synthesized. So even if this were logically correct and we weren't just trying to talk about additives, it also has the wrong number on the verb. So choice B can't be it, which leaves us with choice D, but let's read it back in, at least partially. Do not contain color or flavor additives, chemical preservatives, or anything that has been synthesized. That sounds like what we would want the sentence to say, because we're talking about things that have been added to the food. Do note that choice E, if it had said or, that actually E would have been more concise and more correct. So if it said do not contain color or flavor additives, chemical preservatives, or anything synthesized, that would have been even better and more concise. So the correct answer on the GMAT is not always the best possible way to write a sentence, and this may be a particularly dorky kind of fun, but sometimes you may be able to at times test yourself to say, well, gosh, how could I make that sentence even better? You may, when you're familiar enough with the principles of GMAT sentence writing, you may even be able to spot ways that the sentences could be even shorter. They don't necessarily have to be, of course, but it's a nice little thing to notice. When you start noticing that you could make it shorter using the rules on the GMAT, you know that you're really starting to get the rules of sentence correction. Okay, home stretch, 4 more questions. Page 661, number 18. Plants are more efficient at acquiring carbon than are fungi in the form of carbon dioxide and converting it to energy-rich sugars. Okay, so we have plants are more efficient. So we have a comparison, and this is one of those things that just confuses many people. When do you have to repeat the verb when you are when you're doing comparisons, and when don't you? So we have, in terms of issues to worry about, we have comparison. We also have a modifying phrase, and I'd say those are the 2 main ones. Let's talk about the modifying phrase first, because that's a little bit easier. The modifying phrase is actually not in the underlined portion. The underlined portion is the main sentence. Plants are more efficient at acquiring carbon dioxide than are fungi. The problem is actually the phrase that comes right after that, where it says in the form of carbon dioxide. What is in the form of carbon dioxide? It's actually carbon that's in the form of carbon dioxide. And remember that on the GMAT and in real life, modifying phrases need to be as close as possible to the thing that they're modifying. So the phrase in the form of carbon dioxide needs to be close to carbon, not fungi. The fungi are not in the form of carbon dioxide. That would mean that the fungi were at the molecular level, and that does not make sense. So any answer choice that ends the underlined portion with fungi is wrong. We need the correct answer to end the underlined portion needs to end with carbon, because the phrase in the form of carbon dioxide is not underlined and not negotiable. It's stuck where it is. So things that end our section with fungi are A, B, and E. So we were able to eliminate 3 answer choices just on the basis of the placement of that modifying phrase. Mastering modifying phrases are a huge deal on the GMAT. It will enable you to get a lot of relatively easy and medium level and even some harder level questions right, and will definitely enable you to eliminate a lot of wrong answer choices. So then we have this issue of the comparison. So what would be a good sentence? The one I usually use is a phone call one. So we could say, you know, or we'll just say Bill likes Kelly more than Pat. So this is one of those classic sentences that could actually mean more than one thing. This could be Bill likes Kelly more than Pat likes Kelly, or Bill likes Kelly more than Pat does. That's how we would repeat the verb. It could also be Bill likes Kelly more than he likes Pat. And it's not clear from the sentence as written which it is. And so if there's ambiguity in what the sentence could mean, you do need to either spell it out or repeat the verb. Bill likes Kelly more than Pat does, or Bill likes Kelly more than he likes Pat. And so that's what's going on in this original comparison here. Plants are more efficient at acquiring carbon than are fungi. Choice B, even though it ended in fungi and we already eliminated it as wrong, I might as well cover this topic. Plants are more efficient at acquiring carbon than fungi. That could mean that plants are better at acquiring carbon than they are at acquiring fungi. And that, I don't know, maybe that's true. I'm not a botanist, but there's ambiguity there, and that's what would make choice B wrong, even if it weren't for the modification error. So now we have it down between choice C and D. Plants are more efficient than fungi at acquiring carbon in the form of carbon dioxide and converting it to energy-rich sugars. And then we have choice D, plants more efficient than fungi at acquiring carbon in the form of carbon dioxide and converting it to energy-rich sugars. Choice D is missing a main verb. We have two, or really one modifying phrase, plants, and then we describe plants as more efficient than fungi, and then the two ways that they're more efficient, but we don't actually have a word like are. It could say plants are more efficient, but it doesn't have that word are. It's missing our main verb. So that can't be the right answer. Which means choice C has a main verb, plants are more efficient, and yeah, choice C is our winner. 661, number 19. The Iroquois were primarily planters, but supplementing their cultivation of maize, squash, and beans with fishing and hunting. So remember, the word but is one of our coordinating conjunctions that joins similar grammatical items. So we have the Iroquois were primarily hunters, so we have a past tense main verb. We would expect on the other side of but another past tense main verb, but instead we have but supplementing. If it had said the Iroquois traditionally or primarily engaged in planting, but occasionally supplementing, but also were found occasionally supplementing, then we could have supplementing. But really we expect another verb to be after but. Yeah. So going down the answer choices, we can see that choices A and E still have supplementing, which is not a main verb form, it's a participle form. So choice B has had supplemented, choice C has supplemented, and D has supplemented. So now we need to differentiate between them. Choice B has and had supplement. This is the past perfect tense of the verb. Remember that you're only going to see the past perfect tense when you're describing action that happened prior to some other verb that happens in the past tense. So if choice B is the correct one, the Iroquois were primarily planters but had supplemented their cultivation of maize, squash, and beans with fishing and hunting. That means that they used to supplement it but stopped at some point before the main verb of being primarily planters. While that could be the case, the sentence as written originally gives us no context clues to suggest that these things happened in some kind of chronological order. In fact, the sentence is implying that just in general, they were primarily planters and supplemented their cultivation with hunting and fishing. So having a past perfect tense creating a sequence of events rather than just saying, hey, this is the way things were at this one point in time, messes things. It changes the meaning of the sentence, basically. And then we have a choice between C and even though they supplemented, or just although they supplemented. And I think it's pretty clear, an opening phrase like, and even though they supplemented with this, that sets up the expectation of whatever the contrast is to that. And even though they did this, even though they did X, Y. Okay? So even though it creates the expectation of something that doesn't actually follow in the sentence. So choice C teases us and basically makes the sentence not correct, because then it's missing the follow-through on what even though is contrasting. Whereas although, while it is a contrast word, it can contrast with what just came before. So the Iroquois were primarily planters, although they supplemented their cultivation of maize, squash, and beans with hunting and fishing, or fishing and hunting, sorry. So choice D actually does give us contrast, you know, and it also gives us a simple past tense main verb to go after but, to match the simple past tense were before but. So choice D for number 19. Page 661, number 20. As contrasted with the honeybee, the yellow jacket can sting repeatedly without dying and carries a potent venom that can cause intense pain. So, classic GMAT thing to look for in terms of predictions, opening modifying phrase, set off by a comma, and then a noun. Whenever this happens, you need to make sure that the modifying phrase and the noun are both the same types of things. So especially if it's a comparison, like as contrasted with the honeybee, or unlike the honeybee, or just the same as the honeybee. We need to compare nouns to nouns, or similar things to similar things. And it doesn't, and you know, sometimes the GMAT will underline the modifying phrase. Sometimes it'll underline the noun and have the modifying phrase be the part that's not underlined. You can't always count on it being the modifying phrase that's underlined like it is in like it is in question 20. At any rate, so we need the two things to be alike. Since the yellow jacket is the part that's not underlined, the thing being compared in the modifying phrase needs to be the honeybee. Not parts of the honeybee, not the attitude of the honeybee, not the cute colors of the honeybee, nothing about the honeybee other than just the honeybee. It needs to be honeybee versus yellow jacket. So any answer choice that does not compare the honeybee to the yellow jacket cannot be right. Note that choice A does have the honeybee. So choice A is okay. Choice B, in contrast to the honeybees, apostrophe S, possessive. The honeybees what? So we are not comparing something that the honeybee has to something that the yellow jacket has, so B is not it. Choice C, unlike the sting of the honeybee. Nope, we don't want any part of the bee, we want just the bee, not C. Choice D has unlike that of the honeybee. Unlike what? We are supposed to be comparing the honeybee to the yellow jacket. So really, it is as simple as going down the list and making sure that just as we had yellow jacket, the only noun in the modifying phrase needs to be honeybee. And even though choice B, the only noun, is honeybee, it implies the existence of a noun, and that's still naughty. So we have a choice between choice A, as contrasted with the honeybee, and choice E, unlike the honeybee. Well, both of them are okay, but choice E is clearly the more concise, and so that makes it the correct answer, because it introduces no other errors, and unlike is fewer words. Instead of as contrasted with being 3 words, unlike is just 1. So someday, if you have a job where you're paid by the word, you may want to reverse engineer the GMAT and include all these other ways of putting other words in. But for the purposes of your studies, for the big test, more concise is better. Let's do one more. Page 661, number 21. Neuroscientists, having amassed a wealth of knowledge over the past 20 years about the brain and its development from birth to adulthood, are now drawing solid conclusions about how the human brain grows and how babies acquire language. I try when I read these out loud to make it sound like it's correct, even if it's not. I'm not saying whether this one is correct as written or not, but I want to try and not make it clear from the way that I read something whether it's grammatically incorrect, because that's not the way you should be analyzing these. You will be using your own inner ear at times to say, wow, that doesn't sound right. And if that's a reliable test for you when you do your own studies, by all means do that. But I want to try and stick to grammatical things that obey rules whenever possible. Okay, so once again we have our subject, tons of words, and then a verb. In this case we have neuro people, and the main verb is are. We do have a modifying phrase that begins with the word having, and remember how I said that you need to be suspicious of the word having, so we will be suspicious of it here to see if there's a way that we can get around using it. And really there's a lot of modifying phrases, just like the one with sunspots where we had like that little phrase on the surface of the sun where we put it in a different place and changed the meaning of the sentence. There's a bunch of those little modifying phrases between the word neuroscientists and the word are. So between here and here, there's tons of little modifying phrases that need to be as close as possible to the thing they modify in order to make sense. So choice A, a neuroscientist, okay, modifying phrase, having amassed a wealth of knowledge, okay, that modifies neuroscientists. Over the past 20 years, that explains the time frame over which they amass the knowledge. About the brain, okay, so that's knowledge about the brain. Well, so about the brain is separated a little bit from knowledge, but you can't really have years about the brain, so it's not ambiguous yet. About the brain and its development from birth to adulthood. From birth to adulthood is another modifying phrase, but it's right next to development, so that sounds okay. And then we have our verb are. Okay, well, choice A sounds good, but we still have having to be suspicious of, and there may be other ways of rewriting that stuff in the middle. So choice B, neuroscientists, having amassed a wealth of knowledge about the brain and its development from birth to adulthood over the past 20 years. Okay, so there they moved over the past 20 years, and that still seems fine. The time phrase isn't more ambiguous. I suppose you could argue that that's the development of the brain over the past 20 years. So that's a little tricky. But then there's and are. And are. We don't actually have a verb. Remember, and is a coordinating conjunction, one of our fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, that can join two similar grammatical elements. We would have needed a main verb before the word are in order to have and are here. And we never actually get a main verb like neuroscientists love puppies and are drawing solid conclusions. We don't have a main verb to pair with are, so that can't be right here. Also, choice C has and are, so we can get rid of that one too. Well, actually, we should reread choice C just to make sure it doesn't actually have another verb in it. So choice C, neuroscientists amassing a wealth of knowledge about the brain and its development from birth to adulthood over the past 20 years and are. So no verb to pair with are. Can't be that one. D, neuroscientists have amassed a wealth of knowledge over the past 20 years about the brain and its development from birth to adulthood, now drawing solid conclusions about how the human... Well, so there we're also missing a verb again. In fact, we don't have a main verb at all. We have neuroscientists amassing, we have neuroscientists have amassed. No, so we do actually have a main verb. I'm sorry, I was looking up at choice C. So neuroscientists have amassed a wealth of knowledge, comma, now drawing solid conclusions. Now, so it's the now drawing that's a problem, because the word that appears right before now drawing is adulthood. And on the GMAT, a present participle like drawing after a comma, modifying something that came before is either going to modify the word that came right before the comma or the entire phrase, when in choice D it's supposed to be modifying neuroscientists, the subject of the main verb. So neither of the two common cases, the word right before or everything that came before, neither of those applies in choice D, and so it can't be right. Same thing with choice E, actually. Neuroscientists have amassed, over the past 20 years, a wealth of knowledge about the brain and its development from birth to adulthood, comma, now drawing. So it's exactly the same issue. They rephrased the stuff in the middle by putting commas around the over the past 20 years, which is probably preferable. But still, we still have adulthood, now drawing, or everything, the amassing of wealth, now drawing. And both of those don't make sense. Drawing needs to be modifying neuroscientists, which is what we have in choice A. Neuroscientists, having amassed, are now drawing. By making it part of a verb, it's clearly modifying the subject of the sentence. So choice E has now adulthood, comma, now drawing, which is a problem. Choice A is our correct one. So that's a good place to stop because that's where we promised we would stop, and I'm a little bit over time, 1 minute over. So thanks again for joining me. I guess I need to get a little bit quicker at some of these grammatical explanations. Next time we will pick up with question number 22 on page 661. And thanks. You've been watching Grockit.com's GMAT edition of the OGTV program. My name's Jim Jacobson, and I hope to see you tomorrow.